Hello and welcome to Unbuilt Giants, a series that looks at the development and demise of some of history's most notable and sometimes bizarre skyscraper projects. Before the 1,300-foot Twin Towers would rise above the lower Manhattan skyline in the early 1970s, the long gestating World Trade Center project in New York, initially considered a far more widespread but less iconic proposal in the form of the original scheme, situated on the former South Street seaport on the East River. The initial proposal for the site, unveiled in January 1960, would have covered 13.5 acres and comprised a single 70-story hotel and office building and an international trading market, with the eventual cost coming to approximately $250 million to $355 million. However, as a result of a political compromise between the governments of New York and New Jersey, the World Trade Center would instead rise on the west side of Lower Manhattan, and based on the expected demand forecasts for floor space, came in an incarnation that would surpass all expectations for the original East River scheme. In 1960, the Port Authority of New York unveiled an ambitious plan to create a World Trade Center along the East River in Lower Manhattan, a project intended to cement New York's status as the hub of global commerce. Envisioned as a vast complex of modern office towers and exhibition spaces, the development would rise on the waterfront near the foot of Wall Street, replacing aging piers and industrial structures with a monumental center dedicated to international trade. The proposal promised to revitalize a declining maritime district and symbolize post-war economic confidence, while also serving as a showcase for the Port Authority's ability to reshape the city's landscape on a grand scale. Yet, despite its bold vision, the project immediately faced political, logistical, and community challenges that threatened to derail it before construction could begin. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, New York's East River waterfront thrived as a dense, bustling center of maritime commerce, with the river itself serving as a lifeline for the city's economy. Along its piers and slips, the waterfront supported a complex ecosystem of activity, including ship chandlers supplying vessels with essential equipment and provisions, workshops repairing and maintaining the constant stream of ships, saloons catering to sailors and dock workers, and boarding houses offering temporary lodging for the transient population that kept the port alive. The surrounding streets echoed with the sounds of carts, hoists, and whistles, and the area's commercial institutions relied heavily on the traffic of goods moving in and out of the harbor. Yet, even at the height of this energy, the seeds of decline were being sown. By the 1880s, the East River Port began to lose its competitive edge. Its narrow piers and shallow waters left little room for expansion and could not accommodate the increasingly large, modern steamships that were reshaping global trade. Shipping companies began to favor other parts of the harbor with deeper berths and more space, and the slow retreat of maritime commerce had quietly begun. By the 1930s, the transformation was unmistakable. Many of the East River piers had slipped into neglect and disrepair, their once busy decks now quiet and largely empty, while cargo operations migrated westward to Manhattan's Hudson River piers or across the harbor to Hoboken, where better infrastructure awaited. This shift signaled not only a change in shipping logistics, but also the erosion of the local economy that had sustained generations of workers. After the Second World War, the pace of decline accelerated. Technological advances in shipping, including containerization, only deepened the East River's obsolescence. By the 1950s, the old Ward Line docks, Piers 15, 16, and part of 17, stood largely abandoned, relics of an era that had slipped away. The demolition of the second Fulton Market in 1951, replaced by a plain utilitarian shed, captured the spirit of the neighborhood's decline. Where there had once been a lively nexus of trade, the area had become a hollowed-out shadow of its former self, a fragment of the city left behind by progress. Amid this backdrop of urban stagnation, the idea of a World Trade Center in New York emerged as a beacon of ambition. First proposed in 1943, during the final years of the Second World War, the concept gained traction when the New York State Legislature passed a bill granting Governor Thomas E. Dewey the authority to begin planning such a project. The vision was bold: to consolidate and elevate the city's role in international trade by providing a dedicated hub for commerce that would signal New York's global stature. Yet despite the optimism, the early post-war years proved inhospitable to such grand ambitions. By 1949, the initial plans were quietly shelved, and momentum faded. Through the late 1940s and into the 1950s, New York's economic growth increasingly centered on Midtown Manhattan, which was better suited to the new realities of corporate life. Modern office towers rose there in clusters, supported by improved transit links, while Lower Manhattan languished. The financial district, once the pulsating heart of American finance, suffered from a lack of residential life, cultural amenities, and entertainment. The narrow streets emptied after business hours, and the exodus of port activity only deepened the sense of desolation. Many workers had relocated to the suburbs, preferring the convenience of commuting to Midtown rather than enduring the longer journey downtown. By the mid-1950s, this drift threatened the very identity of Lower Manhattan. In 1955, during a lunch with the powerful city planner Robert Moses, David Rockefeller received a stark warning. The new Chase Manhattan Bank headquarters he was preparing to open on Cedar Street would be a disaster if the surrounding district continued to lose tenants and vitality. Rockefeller, deeply invested in the city's financial prestige and in his family's legacy, recognized the urgency of the situation. He feared that without a coordinated effort to modernize and reinvigorate the area, New York's traditional center of finance could slip irreversibly into decline, eclipsed by Midtown and other rising urban hubs. Motivated by this concern, Rockefeller began to explore strategies to stabilize and transform the downtown core. By 1957 and 1958, he and a coalition of influential business leaders coalesced around a shared goal: the redevelopment of the East River waterfront below the Brooklyn Bridge. They viewed the underutilized piers and adjacent blocks as both a liability and an opportunity, a site where bold planning could reverse decades of decay and signal a new chapter for the city's southern tip. In 1958, Rockefeller formalized these efforts by founding the Downtown Lower Manhattan Association, or DLMA, an organization explicitly dedicated to the district's revival. The DLMA quickly moved to shape the conversation about Lower Manhattan's future, commissioning the renowned architectural and planning firm Skidmore, Owings and Merrill to develop a sweeping, comprehensive vision for redevelopment. Their task was not merely to fill empty lots, but to reimagine an entire urban landscape, transforming it from a neglected remnant of the 19th century into a modern, competitive, and vibrant environment that could reassert New York's dominance on the world stage. This initiative marked the opening act of the transformation that would eventually give rise to the World Trade Center, setting in motion decades of planning, negotiation, and construction that would redefine the skyline and the identity of Lower Manhattan. The proposal, presented to the public in late June 1960, outlined an ambitious vision for a World Trade Center situated on a 13-acre or 53,000 square meter site along the East River in the vicinity of the historic South Street seaport. This location was carefully defined, bounded by Old Slip to the south, Water Street to the west, Fulton Street to the north, and South Street to the east, creating a distinct parcel for the planned redevelopment. The design called for the replacement of the conventional street grid with a striking two-story platform that would lift the complex above the surrounding traffic and bustle of Lower Manhattan, signaling a bold departure from the area's traditional urban fabric. Central to the proposal was a 900-foot or 270-meter exhibition hall, conceived as a vast and flexible space for international trade shows, paired with a soaring tower that could range from 50 to 70 stories. The tower's uppermost floors were intended to house hotel accommodation, offering panoramic views over the city and harbor, while the lower levels would be dedicated to office and commercial functions. To complement these primary elements, the plan incorporated a theater for cultural and business events, a variety of retail shops and restaurants to serve both visitors and workers, and a proposed new securities exchange. The DLMA even suggested that the New York Stock Exchange might one day occupy this modern facility, embedding the financial heart of the city within the new center. In architectural terms, the 1960 scheme clearly drew on the principles of the international style, favoring clean lines, geometric forms, and the prominent use of glass and steel. The buildings were conceived as rectilinear volumes, carefully arranged in a harmonious composition that would project modernity and efficiency. The integration of the complex with the waterfront was a key feature of the vision. Direct access for maritime trade was considered, and there was discussion of accommodating ferry services or cargo operations to strengthen the development's role as a hub for global commerce. Transport connectivity was central to the proposal's logic, with careful attention given to the movement of both people and goods. Plans included elevated highways to streamline vehicular access, pedestrian concourses for safe and convenient circulation, and even a heliport that would extend out into the East River, symbolizing the embrace of cutting-edge infrastructure. Together, these elements express the goal of creating a monumental yet highly functional center for international trade, a physical manifestation of New York City's growing prominence on the world stage. Following the initial presentation, championed by David Rockefeller, the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey became increasingly involved in the project, recognizing its potential to reshape Lower Manhattan and strengthen the region's commercial capacity. As an organization with extensive experience in major infrastructure initiatives and the financial resources to undertake such a massive scheme, the Port Authority was uniquely positioned to move the idea from concept to reality. On March 10, 1961, the authority released a comprehensive report entitled A World Trade Center in the Port of New York, which enthusiastically endorsed the project and laid out a refined vision for its implementation. The report described a World Trade Mart rising 72 stories, an emblem of international business, and projected a construction cost of $355 million, a vast sum, but one considered commensurate with the anticipated economic benefits. It advocated firmly for the East River location, stressing the advantage of immediate access to port facilities and the potential to link shipping, commerce, and finance within one integrated development. The accompanying promotional materials, including a dramatic rendering of the proposed complex, portrayed the project as a sweeping transformation of the waterfront, turning an underutilized section of the city into a modern, vibrant, and globally significant center for trade. The vision promised not only to reshape the skyline, but also to reinforce New York's identity as a capital of international business and innovation. Despite receiving strong conceptual backing, the proposed project swiftly encountered a series of political and logistical obstacles that proved far more difficult to overcome than its advocates had anticipated. As a bi-state agency, the Port Authority could not act independently. Any major undertaking required the full cooperation and formal approval of both New York and New Jersey. Almost immediately, the plan ran into opposition from New Jersey Governor Robert B. Minor. He argued that the proposal was unbalanced, asserting that it primarily served New York's interests while offering little tangible benefit to his own state. For Minor, the project was lopsided in both economic and infrastructural terms. He demanded that any agreement include a commitment to rescue the financially troubled Hudson and Manhattan Railroad, H&M, which was a crucial link for New Jersey commuters but had fallen into severe decline. Its ridership had collapsed from 113 million passengers in 1927 to only 26 million by 1958, a staggering reduction that reflected the combined pressures of suburbanization, automobile use, and shifting travel habits. The line's Hudson Terminal Station was equally symptomatic of this decline, a crumbling complex in a deteriorating part of Lower Manhattan, increasingly viewed as an anachronism in a city moving towards modern, large-scale redevelopment. Negotiations dragged on and repeatedly faltered through 1961, even after New York's legislature approved an ambitious package that paired a $335 million trade center with a $70 million plan to acquire and rehabilitate the H&M. No progress could be made without New Jersey's cooperation. The East River proposal carried inherent weaknesses that fueled Minor's resistance. Its location was inconvenient for New Jersey commuters who would have had to travel across the city to access the site. Its potential integration with existing regional transport networks was minimal, leaving the project isolated and arguably less useful as a hub for interstate commerce. On top of these challenges, local opposition emerged within Manhattan itself. Business owners and residents of the area, slated for clearance, feared the displacement of long-standing enterprises, while urban planners worried that placing a massive superstructure atop the old waterfront grid would disrupt traffic flow and erase much of the district's character. By the close of 1961, the Port Authority, under the leadership of Austin J. Tobin, began reconsidering its options. Tobin and his team increasingly recognized that the political impasse could not be broken without a strategic compromise. Within the agency, Sidney Schachter put forward a pivotal suggestion: relocate the World Trade Center project to the west side of Lower Manhattan, directly on the site of Hudson Terminal. This move offered a cascade of advantages. It would allow for the demolition of the obsolete terminal and the construction of a modern facility for the H&M, directly addressing Minor's concerns. It also placed the project at a location naturally oriented towards New Jersey, improving its transport logic and strengthening its case as a bi-state initiative. The idea promised to bypass the tangle of legal, logistical, and community hurdles that had stalled the East River plan. Momentum shifted quickly once this alternative took shape. In December 1961, Tobin reached an informal understanding with New Jersey's newly inaugurated governor, Richard J. Hughes, who proved far more receptive than his predecessor. On January 22, 1962, both states formally agreed to relocate the project to the Hudson River waterfront. The Port Authority would assume control of the H&M, later rebranded as PATH, and in doing so, secure New Jersey's support for the creation of the World Trade Center. This agreement marked the effective death of the original East River proposal, which by then had become politically untenable. The grand vision of a monumental trade complex rising along the East River thus never came to fruition. Its failure stemmed from its inability to win bi-state approval, its disregard for New Jersey's pressing transportation concerns, and the knot of legal and logistical problems tied to its waterfront siting. In moving the project westward, the Port Authority not only secured the future of a struggling transit line, but also laid the groundwork for what became one of the most recognizable architectural landmarks in the world. Construction of the World Trade Center on the site of the old Radio Row began in 1966 and culminated in 1973, forever altering the skyline of Lower Manhattan. While the World Trade Center project advanced at a dramatic pace, a different movement was taking shape along the East River, where efforts to preserve the historic South Street seaport began to gather momentum. In 1966, maritime enthusiasts Peter and Norma Stanford took the first major step in this endeavor by founding Friends of South Street, a group dedicated to safeguarding the area's unique nautical heritage and advocating for the creation of a maritime museum. Their vision was to protect the surviving 19th-century waterfront and celebrate New York's long and storied relationship with the sea, which had defined the city's rise as a center of trade. By 1967, concrete plans were in motion for a museum that would not only showcase historic ships, but also preserve the surrounding urban fabric. This ambitious concept included the integration of piers, working vessels, and a collection of historic warehouses and commercial buildings clustered near South and Fulton Streets. Momentum built quickly. In 1968, the museum secured the Titanic Memorial, a poignant granite lighthouse commemorating those lost in the 1912 disaster, and began acquiring historic vessels that would form the heart of its floating collection. Among the most significant were the lightship Ambrose, a former sentinel of New York Harbor, and the Wavertree, a massive 19th-century iron-hulled cargo ship that had survived decades of service and neglect. These acquisitions signaled that the preservation efforts were not only serious, but also ambitious, aimed at establishing a working, living museum, rather than a static display. Restoration efforts officially commenced on May 15, 1969, marking the transition from planning to physical renewal. That summer, the museum took a decisive step by acquiring 2 blocks of the venerable Schermerhorn Row, a series of early 19th-century counting houses, effectively securing the historic core of the site and ensuring that the area's architectural legacy would be protected for future generations. By the early 1970s, the South Street Seaport Museum had begun to flourish as a cultural and historical destination. It operated Piers 15 and 16, maintained several restored 19th-century buildings, and managed a fleet of 6 historic ships, each with its own story to tell about the era when New York's fortunes depended on maritime trade. The museum also became a lively center for public engagement, hosting regular cultural events, exhibitions, and educational programs that drew attention to the city's seafaring past. Meanwhile, just across Lower Manhattan on the west side, an entirely different vision of progress was taking physical form. The World Trade Center rose from the vast, cleared expanse that had once been the bustling district of Radio Row, its steel skeletons gradually dominating the skyline. The Twin Towers, completed between 1973 and 1975, stood as symbols of a new economic era, embodying the ambition to revitalize Lower Manhattan as a hub of global commerce and financial power. Together, the contrasting developments, the preservation of the historic seaport, and the rise of the futuristic World Trade Center captured the city's dual impulses during this transformative period, to honor its maritime roots while projecting its aspirations onto the modern world stage. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please hit the like button and consider subscribing for more episodes coming soon. See you next time.